So hit me one more. Gotta keep on being on the run, 'cause I wanna live without a line between the moon and sun. Release me, kill my misery, and redirect my destiny. We're headed for a better day.
Muchísimas gracias por estar en esta última conferencia de TagCDMX. Estamos de muy buen humor por lo que viene en los próximos minutos. Me piden, les recuerde que el uso de celulares no se puede en esta conferencia, no se vale grabar nada. Y bueno, pues estamos muy contentos, pues TagCDMX cumple 5 años de celebrar ideas geniales. Y para platicarles mejor de lo que quiere decir esto, está aquí Tania Esparza Oteo, quien es la directora general de nuestro festival. Un aplauso, por favor.
Ay, como que mucha luz. Bueno, hola a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí todo el festival, por estar aquí también en esta conversación. Pues estamos muy contentos, como dijo Emiliano, nuestra voz en off. Esta es nuestra quinta edición y ha sido pues un viaje increíble estar organizando este festival de creatividad. Hemos aprendido muchísimo, hemos conocido gente increíble. Siento que hemos puesto esta plataforma como para que talentos de muchas disciplinas se conozcan y hagan cosas juntos. Y bueno, pues para cerrar, tenemos esta conversación con Edward Snowden, una gran personalidad. Ahorita vamos a ver un video que vamos a presentar y también Rafa, que ahorita lo presento, nos va a platicar un poco más de ellos. Pero antes quiero también agradecer al Centro Cultural del Bosque y al Teatro de la Danza por abrirnos sus espacios para este festival, por recibirnos estos días. Desde el año pasado nos abrieron sus puertas y la verdad es que es un espacio increíble para organizar este festival. Y también quiero agradecer a la Ciudad de México, por supuesto, que creyó en nosotros y en este festival desde el primer año y nos ha apoyado en todo. También creo que está increíble que en esta ciudad estén sucediendo todos estos festivales, todas estas fiestas, galerías, no sé, una explosión de creatividad. La verdad es que lo aplaudimos. Y bueno, ahora sí ya no voy a hablar más, voy a presentar a Rafa Fernández de Castro. Pasa, Rafa.
Gracias, Tania.
Rafa, bueno, lo conozco hace poquito tiempo, estamos justo trabajando en este nuevo proyecto que se llama Fusión. Él lleva trabajando 3 años en Fusion en Estados Unidos y ahora vino para aquí a México para presentar este nuevo medio. Entonces lo dejo para que nos platique un poco de Fusión y también pues para que lleve esta conversación con Edward Snowden.
Gracias, Tania.
Gracias, que lo disfruten. Lo dejo.
Bueno, no les quiero echar un rollo larguísimo porque sé que vinieron a ver a Ed Snowden, pero Fusión va a ser, yo lo definiría como un punto de encuentro para los lectores curiosos, inquietos, que buscan historias sobre las tendencias que los rodean, contadas sin pretensiones. Vamos a abordar temas tan diversos como el arte, la sátira política, la innovación, el medio ambiente, y siempre subrayando para el lector cómo me afecta esto a mí. Sobre todo, vamos a hacer un megáfono para todas las voces de México, sobre todo las voces que no están representadas en la cobertura del día a día de los medios tradicionales. Cuando digo eso me refiero a la comunidad LGBT, a la comunidad indígena, a las subculturas urbanas y a los grupos de baja inclusión social. Queremos ser muy inclusivos y queremos que ustedes participen en este proyecto. Si ustedes siempre han querido escribir para el Reforma, pero no tienen un contacto en la industria, si ustedes quieren escribir para el Universal o salir en la tele, vénganse con nosotros. Estamos buscando gente hambrienta, gente con talento, pero sobre todo con muchas ganas de hacer las cosas, con muchas ganas de hacer periodismo. Y en verdad este es un esfuerzo de periodismo de chavos para chavos. Hasta ahí mi rollo. Cuando esté Fusión se van a enterar, va a estar muy padre. Preparamos un video para todos aquellos que no creo que sean muchos que no sepan quién es Ed Snowden. Y durante el transcurso de la entrevista, por favor, piensen en preguntas. Vamos a abrir el micrófono por 30 minutos. Van a poder hablar directamente con Ed Snowden. Y para los que están desde fuera viéndolo por el live stream, pueden mandar sus preguntas al Twitter de Tag. Vamos a seleccionar algunas y las vamos a leer para que esto sea totalmente plural, totalmente democrático. Entonces, muchas gracias y rolen video y nos vamos a la entrevista.
Era un chico callado que llevaba una vida relativamente tranquila con su novia en Hawái, hasta el día en que a los 29 años, Edward Snowden se convirtió en el fugitivo más buscado del mundo. Snowden, un contratista de la Agencia de Seguridad Nacional de Estados Unidos, filtró cientos de miles de documentos de inteligencia que revelaron que el gobierno estadounidense estaba espiando a sus propios ciudadanos a través de programas secretos de vigilancia masiva. El genio de la computación huyó a Hong Kong y colaboró con un grupo de periodistas para publicar los documentos secretos. Las agencias más poderosas del mundo se le fueron encima. Snowden tenía la intención de tomar otro vuelo e huir a América Latina, pero su pasaporte fue cancelado y al final pidió asilo en la Rusia de Vladimir Putin. Su caso dividió a una nación.
I think he's a total traitor, and I would deal with him harshly.
He is a lawbreaker. He violated American law.
I think Snowden played a very important role in educating the American people to the degree in which our civil liberties, constitutional rights are being undermined.
I believe he's a hero. I believe he's coming directly from his heart, that he feels some goodness, that he wants to be truthful to the American people.
Quizá el gran crimen de Snowden fue confirmar y detallar lo que ya sospechábamos. Desnudó las operaciones del gobierno estadounidense. Entre otras cosas, reveló que el gobierno tuvo acceso a los récords telefónicos de millones de clientes de la compañía Verizon y los datos de usuarios de Google, Facebook y Apple. Los programas gubernamentales recopilaron grandes cantidades de datos sobre ciudadanos de Estados Unidos y otros países, entre ellos México. Se intervinieron las comunicaciones de líderes, entre ellos el presidente Felipe Calderón y Enrique Peña Nieto cuando aún era candidato. La agencia espió a ciudadanos, empresarios, políticos y diplomáticos en otros países para que los funcionarios estadounidenses tuvieran una ventaja competitiva a la hora de negociar. Snowden ahora ha sido inmortalizado en libros, películas, documentales y símbolos de protesta. Pero si regresa a Estados Unidos, podría ser encarcelado hasta por 30 años. O algo peor. Sin embargo, no pide disculpas.
I would not have done it if I didn't believe it was right.
Recientemente, tuiteó en español para advertirnos sobre los peligros del ciberespionaje después de que un reportaje del diario The New York Times señalara que se intentó monitorear los dispositivos electrónicos de periodistas y activistas mexicanos. Su mensaje es bastante simple. Algunas de las tecnologías que fueron creadas para liberarnos están siendo usadas para chantajearnos y controlarnos. Nuestras computadoras, celulares, redes sociales. El gran hermano ya está aquí. Traidor, patriota, soplón, disidente, héroe. Edward Snowden.
Tenemos a Ed en la línea. Ed. Bienvenido a México. Welcome to Mexico City.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear us all right? Can you hear us all right?
I can. You hear me?
Perfect. Ed, my first question has to be, are we being spied on right now?
Absolutely. We're using Google Hangouts. So in addition to sort of the governmental mass surveillance that we all hear about, companies and corporations are very much doing the same thing. And where this is most dangerous is where we see a fusion between the two, working hand in hand. Google Hangouts, which we're using right now because this is a public call, makes a record of every communication you send, every video chat that you sort of provide, like we're doing right now, and they make an offer to the United States government that goes beyond what the law requires. This is very much sort of beyond what is strictly required. And they say, hey, if you provide us with some legal order, right, and this is a very low level sort of legal approval from a court, in their defense, this is a court order, they'll provide the copy of this call. They'll provide everything that you've ever sent over Gmail. They'll provide everything that you've ever typed in a Google search box, going back years and years and years, far before you remember. And this comes in sort of a pristine copy. Now, the interesting thing about that is I mentioned court orders. And this is required because I'm a United States citizen. But if it's a call between a citizen of Mexico and another citizen of Mexico, or any two people who are not U.S. citizens, they can get that exact same information. So perfect copy.
They're probably, we are probably being spied. But let me ask you. Let me get to the core of the interview. I want to know, how does it feel waking up every day knowing that you're one of the American government's most wanted fugitives? What's the sensation of, what's the anxiety behind that?
Wonderful. It feels wonderful, right?
How do you get used
and this
to
is
that?
something that's non-intuitive. It sounds like it should be terrible. You should be looking over your shoulder because you're hunted. And you know, the reality is there's always some uncertainty. There's always some sense of loss. You know, I can't go home. But you have to think about, why are you wanted? Right? Why are you being chased? And it's for doing the right thing, returning public information to public hands, things that people needed to know that was absolutely necessary. That's not just something that, you know, keeps you okay with what you've lost. It's something that makes you proud of the decisions you're made, encourages you to do more of the same. Hopefully, I'll live a pretty long life and get to keep doing this, but we don't know.
How do you reach?
I'm going to keep trying.
How do you reach that point, though? How do you reach that point where you're willing to risk it all, even lose it all? I mean, how do you reach that point emotionally, I guess?
Yeah, and it's kind of a long story, and I know we have limited time, so I'll try to compress it. But it was not natural for me. I'm very much a child, not just of my family, but of the federal government of the United States. My father worked for the military for more than 30 years before retiring. My grandfather retired as an admiral. Then he went to work for the FBI, the same group that's now hunting me. My mother worked and still works for the federal court system that's now trying to jail me. And I grew up expecting that I would be working in the system, and in fact, I eventually did. But this is something that I had a lot of skepticism towards. I was not a critic of government. I was not a dissident in the traditional manner. I signed up for the Iraq War when everyone else was protesting it because I didn't think that the government would lie. When they said we were going there to free oppressed people from a dictator, I believed them. When they said we were going because they knew there were weapons of mass destruction, I believed them. It took a very, very long time for the lies, bit by bit, to pile up to such a height that they persuaded even me, sort of the least skeptical among us. But I think this is the critical lesson for all of us, right? Is I'm not an extraordinary person, right? There are no extraordinary people. We're all ordinary. We just end up in extraordinary circumstances, in unusual moments in time. And we have to pay attention and recognize when things around us go so wrong that you have not just the right to act, but you actually have an obligation, you have a duty to try to resist the bad things, the criminal activities occurring around you, and return things to a better path.
Now, I have to ask you this. Your critics often accuse you of hypocrisy.
of asking for asylum in Russia, a country whose government has censored many journalists, protesters, has monitored the opposition, and has launched cyber attacks against other nations. What's your response to these critics, and what's the price you pay by remaining in Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. I think this is something that should be asked, right? One of these questions that sort of the underlying thing is, why trust me, right? Maybe I'm a bad guy. Maybe I'm a liar. Maybe I'm deceiving everyone. Or maybe I just don't care. I'm completely amoral. And, I wear shirts that say, I love Putin. But the reality is, I'm not in Russia by choice. I never tried to stay here. In fact, I was transiting through Russia on the way to Latin America, where we expected my team that I would get asylum there. But when the United States heard that I was crossing through Russia, that I had passed out of Hong Kong, they canceled my passport, trapping me in Russia. And when they heard that I might be trying to leave Russia, famously, the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, was attending an energy summit in Russia. And there was a rumor that he was going to take me on board his presidential plane, right, which has diplomatic immunity, and fly me back to Bolivia, and then grant me asylum there. They grounded his aircraft, which is a total violation of international law. They called all the countries in Europe, and they got France, Portugal, and I believe Spain, but I'm not entirely sure on that, and got them to close their airspace to Evo Morales' plane, blocking him from continuing onwards. And this was dangerous because Bolivia is not the richest country in the world, so it's a smaller aircraft, and it had to refuel. And it was forced to land in Austria, and they would not let his plane leave Europe. This is the president, right, of a country, until he let them search his plane to see if I was on board. So the real question here is not why I'm in Russia, but why the United States won't let me leave.
But I guess
if they were really worried about hypocrisy, right? If they were really worried that there's some sort of sympathy here.
I'm aware you didn't have a choice. I'm aware you didn't have a choice. They cancel your passport. But what's the price you pay? I think, is there a price to your image? You're a digital rights activist now. What's the price you by remaining all this time in Russia? Is there a specific price you're paying in terms of image, in terms of I don't know, U.S. citizens saying, well, Snowden is talking about digital rights and freedom, but he's in a country where there's little of that, maybe?
I mean, that would be a fair criticism if I didn't say anything about what's happening in Russia. But instead of that, right, instead of saying, I heart Putin, I'm one of the only Western activists that I'm aware of that's in Russia that's actively criticizing these things, where the Russian government very easily could kick me out, right? I'm in a precarious situation. Everybody knows that. The United States government won't let me leave. I applied for asylum in 21 different countries around the world, primarily in Western Europe, for example, to leave Russia. And every time they got close saying yes, the United States would call them their foreign ministries and say, if you let this guy in, right, we'll take some action against you. We'll get revenge against you. And despite this, right, despite the fact that I'm not there by choice, despite the fact that I'm still so many years later where I could be settling into Russia, still actively trying to build bridges, right, to extend this asylum beyond where I can't travel and I'm stuck in Russia, I have criticized Russia's anti-terrorism laws. I have prominently criticized their surveillance laws. Continuously, when there are protests, when there are crackdowns, I'm speaking up. And the real question, I think, is not, is there some hypocrisy, is there some price that I'm paying in terms of image, but what more can I do? What is the alternative? What do you suggest if you are dissatisfied with everything that I'm trying to do? Maybe it's not enough, right? But I didn't sign up to save the world. I signed up to do what I can to make things better in the small way that I actually can.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about Mexico, because we want to know your take on that. You recently tweeted in Spanish to warn Mexicans about the dangers of cyber espionage after the New York Times quoted a study which revealed there was an attempt to monitor the electronic devices of several activists and journalists in Mexico through a malware known as Pegasus. What are your thoughts on this specific scandal?
Yeah, so this is, I think, one of the most important geopolitical dynamics occurring anywhere, right? This is not just about Mexico. This is about the world, but this is one of the clearest cases of a real clear abuse of surveillance authorities that we've known is happening, right? The NSA is abusing its capabilities in the United States. Russia's FSB and other surveillance services are doing the same thing in Russia. The Chinese services are doing it in China. This is not, though, reserved to sort of the super states, the big players network. It's happening in the UK, it's happening in France, it's happening in Germany. Now it's happening in Mexico, and the extraordinary thing is that we have proof about this. For those in the audience who aren't really familiar with it, it's not that the Mexican government attempted to spy on a few people. It's that they attempted it and were actually successful. And it's not a few activists.
Ed, you're saying the Mexican government, right? Because the New York Times did not say the Mexican government directly, but you're saying the Mexican government is conducting this? Did not say the Mexican government
because the report did not go far enough to make this attribution. But I worked professionally at the National Security Agency, performing these kind of operations in terms of counter hacking. My job was to look at people who were doing this from the Chinese military, right, to American targets. I recognize the clustering of targets. I recognize the commonality of the systems and infrastructure that's being used. They are not targeting, excuse me, the Mexican government, right, who I am quite confident is in this. Now, it's clear that the Mexican government has not admitted this. In fact, the president of Mexico has explicitly denied this. But at the same time, he's ordered an investigation. But when we look at the fact that all of these journalists have been targeted, and it's not just journalists, right? It's also the president of the Senate, it's political activists, it's human rights activists, and the kind of messaging that's being used to get them to click these links. They're things that anyone would do. The way this malware works, and this is common with very sophisticated malware, this is purchased from an Israeli private company called the NSO Group. And they send messages to journalists, to their targets, right, of any professional class, that has a link embedded in it, just a browser link. Because the browser in your mobile device, these were specifically targeted for iPhones, I believe. But there's a variant of this same commercial software, Android phones, where if you click it, you go in the browser. It breaks out of the browser to inject code into your phone. The code in your phone then basically runs a process that scans the memory in the system to find out its state. Then it uses this memory that it's stolen to elevate its privileges, right? To stop being a user and begin to actually be the owner of the phone, to take over the phone completely. And again, you say, well, there's no proof that this is the government, or they haven't admitted to this. When you look at this, for example, which is the timeline of these malicious links, and this is all established, this is all factual. These are things that we do have proof of. These links were sent to these targets at this time of the year. And when you look at what we call the clusters, right, these highlighted regions of activities, they correspond directly with large-scale political dynamics that were occurring in the sort of Mexican political sector. The question when you talk about attribution, for example, is this the government? Is this some private group? Is it someone else? The key facts here are this software is only available to governments. It is only sold to governments. The infrastructure from which these links were sold, were sent, and these exploits were thrown against phones, were Spanish language URLs. Spanish language, basically web addresses, that were specifically targeting Mexican groups, right? So there's a Mexican nexus in all of this. Which government is explicitly targeting Mexican journalists who are reporting on solely, exclusively Mexican issues, right? Human rights groups that are looking into specifically human rights abuses by the Mexican government, right? Journalists who are investigating anti-corruption things, stories that again are embarrassing for the Mexican government. Now, it is true, as you say, that we do not have the smoking gun proof here. But in the world of attribution, you never get that without an admission, right? You have to show proof to some extent. But the question is, the only people who could provide that proof are those who are running their surveillance programs. The U.S. National Security Agency could theoretically provide this, but of course they won't because they don't want to give up their capabilities here, and they gain nothing from it other than irritating Mexico. But researchers and the victims actually have their own forensic evidence. People don't understand about how hacking works, how sort of cyber attacks work. It's not like launching a missile at someone. Where the missile is launched, it goes over to the target, it lands, and it's destroyed. That missile lands, and a copy of that resides on the phone in some form. Maybe it's ephemeral, maybe it's only there for a moment, but that can be captured, right? When the malware is operating on the phone, when the phone has been successfully exploited, something has to remain on that phone, some malicious file, right? Some malicious trace, whether it's operating in memory, whether it's operating on sort of the disk,
and
right?
You
where
think that trace goes back to the Mexican government?
Exactly. And these traces all uniquely point back. They cluster back to indicate a strong likelihood, in fact, an overwhelming likelihood, that the Mexican government is responsible for this. And I want to be clear here that it's not simply me that's saying this. The researchers who wrote the report didn't want to go farther than what they could absolutely definitively prove, because they didn't want anyone to discredit their report on that basis. The New York Times did similarly. But the United Nations, right, their cybersecurity experts called on the Mexican government explicitly to stop this surveillance campaign, right? Every independent researcher who looks at this activity goes, yes, obviously, this points to the Mexican government. And the Mexican government, while they've said, we did not do this, they did say, yes, we bought the software that was used in this attack. That's just a coincidence.
Okay.
Maybe you believe them? I don't.
In 2011, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico resigned over the diplomatic cables WikiLeaks published. In 2013, another set of leaks revealed, among other things, that the U.S. government spied on heads of state in other countries, including intercepting German Chancellor Angela Merkel's phone communications. I want to ask you the following. Does the U.S. government actively spy on Mexican institutions and branches of power? When you worked for the NSA and the CIA, were you aware of any programs or tools being used to actively target Mexicans?
So let me add a little bit of preamble to this first. I never make any classified disclosures extemporaneously because I don't think it's my role to decide what should and should not be secret. When I provided these documents originally to journalists, I did so instead of publishing them myself, because what if my political biases were wrong? I didn't want to overrule the entire US political structure and system and just say, I'm the president of secrets, I'm going to decide what is and isn't known. Instead, I wanted these journalists, their institutions, to make independent editorial judgments specifically to remove my bias from the process. So with that in mind, I won't say anything that hasn't previously been talked about in public, but I will go back to what you said in 2013, which I can say is absolutely true. The reporting based on my documents that showed, yes, NSA had explicitly targeted the presidents of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, and Mexico But what's explicitly interesting about this, which people didn't notice, given all of the sort of election hacking that's been in the news recently, is that the memo talking about this targeting of Nieto was actually a month before he was elected. This kind of thing is normal in espionage, right? It's always occurring. I would be thunderstruck if the National Security Agency was not doing this kind of thing today. Not just for Mexico, but just for nearly everyone, even Luxembourg. And they would argue that this is their job. This is what they're supposed to do. And to be honest, I wouldn't be especially critical about this particular targeting of prominent foreign officials. But the real key is about allocation of resources for all of these countries. Should we really be sacrificing the rights of all our citizens to construct these systems of mass surveillance that make it possible to spy on everyone, right? At the expense of spying on those who we really need to be watching most closely. For example, the current US president and the current Mexican president don't seem to get along that great.
No, they don't.
Surely it's interesting for them to spy on one another. But is this absolutely the most prevailing national security need for them to be focused on? I argue no. Yes, it's interesting. Yes, there is some value in it. And maybe you'll catch something that justifies the cost of the program. When these kind of programs are not possible, without constructing sort of schemes that cost millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. And I want to point out that that case that we discussed earlier about the Mexican government spying on these journalists, these activists, opposition lawmakers, they paid something like $80 million for that software. That's $80 million that's not building schools, that's not building hospitals, that's not making the lives of their citizens better, that's making their press less free, that's making civil society less open, less effective, that's protecting corruption rather than exposing corruption. All of these things are conversations that we should be having and deciding as a public, as a people, through reason and open debate, rather than having these decisions, right or wrong. You know, maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think these things are absolutely necessary. They should be happening, right? Okay, let's have that conversation publicly in daylight and set our policy in a way that we don't just support, right? But we understand, we accept, and we recognize this is the foundation of a free and better society, rather than a decision that was made for us, without our knowledge, without our consent, and without our participation.
Now, next year, Mexico will have presidential elections. And we've recently seen countries around the world using cyber attacks and other tactics to meddle in elections. You think Mexico could be a target? Did you catch that last part?
Sorry, I think I missed the last part of your question.
Do you think Mexico could be a target next year when we have elections? Cyber attacks, meddling.
Absolutely.
I don't want to name any names, but the usual suspects.
Right. The main thing when we look at sort of election interference is which states are going to feel that they have the most skin in the game. Who feels they have most to lose? Who feels they have the most to gain by interfering with the outcome? And again, we know that countries, whether we're talking about Russia in this recent election cycle, whether we're talking about the United States historically throughout Latin America, whether, again, we're talking about France and Germany, this is what intelligence services do, right? This is what they believe they're paid for, is to influence outcomes around the world. So absolutely, any election interfered with, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we defend them? How do we make sure that they're fair? How do we make sure they're open? How do we make sure they're reliable?
How can a country like Mexico, how can a country like Mexico defend itself? Given, I guess they, you're saying they bought this software, but they're obviously using it for other means that are not, combating drug trafficking or crime. But how? I mean, it's a serious question. How can the Mexican government or citizens or even candidates and political campaigns out there defend themselves against these types of attacks, whether it's an adversary or another nation trying to favor one candidate over the other?
This is a really interesting question because, again, the United States election has come so sharply into focus. And this is basically the richest nation on earth, right? The most technologically advanced. It's got a very large population. It's got very sophisticated sort of networks. And yet, when we saw in the last hacking conference, right at DEF CON, just a few weeks ago in Las Vegas, they brought the electronic voting machines from around the United States in, and they just said hackers can hack on them, right? They were open. They called it sort of the voting village. And they made these systems available. They were locked down just as they are in the voting stations, and they said, can you hack them? And it's my understanding, fact check me on this if I get this wrong, but of all the systems that they had there, every single one of them was hacked. And I believe they were all hacked within the very first day of this event. That should be really concerning when a country like the United States suffers these problems. But then again, as you say, what about Mexico, right? Countries that have less access to resources, which may not have the same amount of money to throw around to try to fix these problems. And this is perhaps a little bit discouraging for technologists like myself. But when we look at experts in the voting system, one of the best defenses here, at least for ensuring the direct result itself is fair, has not been tampered with, are paper ballots. Because when you have a record like that is not easily tamperable, the election result can be interfered with, right? Some corrupt official could go into the voting station and they could dump a bunch of fake ballots into the bin and mix them around. But those are still going to be there. And we can provide or apply statistical analyses after the fact of an election, where you can go at a certain district, which, for example, went in a way which traditionally it shouldn't have. If it went away from a party that it has supported through the last several cycles, for example, that would be cause to analyze the results. And when you look at them, this has been done in the context of Russian elections, and there have been very strong indications that those votes have been tampered with, right?
To me, it seems like.
And the idea is when you have some forensic record, right, you can actually assess, okay, we have some suspicion that it was interfered with. We can go, was it interfered with? And if the answer is yes, you can have that district revoked. And you can make sure that section by section you have a fair vote. If we're entirely reliant on unreliable electronic records that can be tampered with, and there's no second way, there's no physical way to determine whether or not that was actually the case, now we're moving to a much more dangerous cycle. And I would hope that if we learn anything from sort of the scare of this last prominent media cycle, it's that we need to start thinking about how to secure the validity of our results for everyone at every step of the technology ladder.
Now, I want to ask you about a certain someone we Mexicans don't like very much, Mr. Trump. What's your take on him, and what does Trump mean for U.S. cyber espionage and cybersecurity?
Man, this is
I know it's a
complex
tough one.
Landscape. Yeah, the interesting thing about the current president, when we look at sort of the intelligence landscape, is it's not clear that he understands how it works at all. To be honest, it's not clear that he understands much of anything at all. This limits his ability, I think, to have a policy impact there. So it's more than likely that the status quo will continue because he's busy watching what people say about him on TV. And intelligence services are quite good about simply not having people talk about them until they've done what they want. When we think about more broadly what I think is going on in the context of the political landscape right now in the United States, I think it's clear that we are entering a moment of political crisis. Now, this sounds dramatic and it sounds frightening. I think a lot of people in the United States, when I look at what they're saying, when I look at the tone of the news, when I hear from people back home, people are frightened, people are nervous, people are worried. On the other hand, we see new sort of groups that are becoming almost jubilant, they're becoming more confident, they're becoming more open. We see this with sort of the white supremacist movement that's recently been on the march. People walking with torches in the dark. And this should very much be a concerning moment for people back home, right? They're right to be worried about this. But it's also a moment for optimism. Why do I say that? Because when we expose these politics for what they are, when we see groups that have previously been operating in the shadows where they're safe from criticism, where they're safe from commentary, they can be countered in a new way. They can be discredited not just for a moment, but for a generation because they're on the stage. And although I think we're right to be concerned, and I am very, very much concerned by what I see right now, these people have been put on stage, and I do not believe they can win the contest of ideas. I think now that everyone sees them for what they are, this is a moment for us to fight them, and this is a moment for us to win.
On that note, are you worried the Russian government is going to hand you over to Trump? In 2013, Trump said that if he were president, the Russians would hand you over to him. And this year there are rumors about this. Are you running out of time as we speak? Are you thinking about leaving and seeking asylum elsewhere?
You know, who knows? We did see, at the beginning of this year, sort of the Russian government issued official statements saying they don't do that. That's the ideology of betrayal or something like that. They don't trade human beings back and forth in bargaining chips. So I guess the real question there is, do you trust them, right? For me, I don't think about it because there's literally nothing I can do to influence it. I wouldn't be warned. I wouldn't see it coming, right? It would just be something where I would be woken up in the middle of the night and tossed on a plane, and then boom, I wake up in Guantanamo. But although that would be a very negative outcome for me personally, and of course it would have a lot of impact on my family, it's not something that I want to see happen. For my political ideas, I think there could be no greater point to be made to say that the warnings that I have been making, the alarm that I have been raising, is real, that it matters, that these things are not fake. The government does not chase people around the world for making things up, right? The allegations that the most trusted sort of institutions in journalism made on the basis of these documents are more than allegations. They are fact based on the government's own documents. The government has never denied that these things are true, but there are people who like to say, you know, maybe these things are made up or whatever. If I end up in Guantanamo, I guess, that should hopefully be the end of that argument.
Okay. Do you regret fleeing the U.S.? Private Chelsea Manning, the soldier that leaked documents to WikiLeaks, was arrested and today is free because Barack Obama pardoned her. You think you could have been pardoned if you had decided to stay?
No. But instead of answering this on a personal level, right, because who am I? Again, should we trust my perceptions on these things? Of course, I have an individual bias because they involve me directly. Daniel Ellsberg, the father of American whistleblowing, who revealed the top secret Pentagon Papers study about the Vietnam War, which showed that the United States government, then as now, was lying about matters of critical public importance. said that I was right to leave. In the 1970s, rather than staying in jail, he was allowed to remain free, to talk to the media, to make his case to the public. His voice was not silenced because the courts sort of imposed a wall between what the government wanted and what the public needed. But those laws have been changed since the 1970s. The laws under which I have been charged provide for no public interest defense. I can't tell the jury. I am literally, legally forbidden in the United States from telling the jury why it is that I did what I did. I would not be allowed to talk to journalists about what actually happened. The only side of the story that we would have heard was what the government wanted the public to believe. So long as I am free, we have two sides of the story. When the government lies, I can say that it's a lie and I can attempt to prove it. Now, whether or not people believe me, right, that's for them to decide. But I think having a fuller conversation where we do have both sides, where journalists can actually look for what is the real truth between these differing allegations, is better for the public than the government having a monopoly on truth that history shows us they are not so afraid to abuse.
Now, your family's back home. I wonder, what do your parents think about your situation? Have your parents or your loved ones been targeted or harassed by your actions?
You know, I've been really fortunate, I think we all have, because I did not tell my family, even the love of my life, who I was living with at the time, in Hawaii, you know, when I was out in paradise working for the NSA, spying on everybody all day. I couldn't tell her what was coming. I couldn't tell her what I was planning specifically because of this. If she knew, the FBI would have come after her. They would have said she was a co-conspirator. She was sort of another fact, another party to this, you know, big crime or whatever that they don't approve of. And they could come after her if they could not get to me. They have no legal grounds to do that. And to this point, so far, they have respected that. The only things that we have seen there have been sort of light interference, intimidation, that all governments engage in.
What's that?
But these are things that I wouldn't, you know, especially be concerned about relative to what my true fears were.
So we're getting close to the hour, but I want to ask you one last question before we open this to the floor. Is there something I didn't ask you that you want to highlight? Is there a specific message you want to highlight for Mexico?
You know, the thing that I would be most concerned about in Mexico, and honestly for everyone around the world, particularly in this new age of Trump, is what does mass surveillance mean, right? We didn't talk much about the technology of it, but that's fine. Hopefully people understand it. If you don't, I would encourage you to go back and look at the reporting that's happened and continues to this day. But it's not about surveillance, right? The revelations about the National Security Agency in the United States spying on everyone in the world, as counterintuitive as this may seem, was not about spying. It's about democracy. It's about what happens and what we stand to lose when the government starts making decisions without the public. When the government starts redefining the boundaries of our rights without our knowledge or consent, without our involvement. Traditionally, in an open society, we're supposed to have private citizens and public officials. We're supposed to know everything about the government, right? And they're supposed to know very little about us unless we're a criminal, unless they've gone to a judge and shown that you're up to no good. The judge has agreed, right? And then, and only then, they can use very limited means of investigation to begin monitoring. Now they're monitoring everyone, everywhere, all the time. They say they don't read what you're sending, right? But they collect it just in case they want to read it. They're making records about our activities. This means we're moving into a world where the lives of citizens are being made public, and the affairs of our elected officials are becoming increasingly private. Now, what this means is that the government is becoming ever more powerful, and the people who elect them are becoming ever less powerful. When we look at this in the context of Mexico, when we look at this in the context of the Mexican government is now spying on journalists who write critical stories, when people start asking about mass disappearances, their phones get attacked with $80 million spyware. How fortunate were we to learn about, for example, the secret house of the president's wife, right? And will we be so lucky next time if they start to abuse these powers? Even if you trust the government completely today, right? Even if you're part of the president's party, even if you support what they're doing, their policies, remember, we're never more than a single election away from the Mexican Donald Trump. We need to start thinking about how to structurally reform our systems to protect our rights. Life for a government investigator is not supposed to be easy because the temptation for abuse is too great. It is supposed to be overwhelmingly difficult. So they only use these extraordinary capabilities in circumstances where it is absolutely necessary for the defense of the public. Things should be hard because that makes the public free. When the government is powerful and unrestricted, people are afraid of it with good reason. We want the public to be powerful and the government to have only the capabilities which are truly necessary for it to perform its most vital tasks.
Edward Snowden, thank you. Gracias.
Gracias.
Vamos a hacer una sección de preguntas y respuestas. En la parte de adelante encontrarán 2 micrófonos. Les pedimos que sean breves y directos.
So, Ed, stay with us a little longer. We're going to have the audience ask you directly. ¿Quién se anima? ¿Allá? ¿Son de tuya?
Hi, good evening. First of all, I admire your courage, and I like you to ask, what are your recommendations for us in order to have a better protected data?
The first thing is to care about the politics of the issue, because what we don't want is an arms race. Where you, your family, opposition lawmakers, human rights lawyers, everybody is trying to fight, step by step, become experts in sort of cybersecurity, when the other side is throwing $80 million around to overcome it. That is a dynamic which overwhelmingly favors powerful institutions, right? Rich institutions, and disfavors ordinary people, the public. So when people say things like, I don't care because I have nothing to hide, I'm boring, they can look at me, recognize what that's actually doing. Recognize what that actually means for your community. Privacy isn't about having something to hide. Privacy is about having something to protect. That thing is a free society. That thing is the right to the self, to an open mind, to have your own ideas, right? Privacy and all rights don't mean much to the rich and the powerful because they can enforce their own rights. They can change their rights. They can change the law, right? Whether it's by lobbying or influencing officials or just hiring their own sort of private armies. We see this even with drug traffickers, right? But what if you're not powerful, right? What if you're not even ordinary? What if you're a little bit strange? What if you're a little bit unusual, right? What if you stand out in some way? This is why we have privacy. This is why we have all rights. It is to protect the minority against the majority, because the majority decides where the lines are drawn. The majority decides what is allowed and what is not allowed, right? But it is the minority that gives us progress. It is the minority that drives humanity forward. It is the people who are different, who have a new idea, who say something that people don't agree with, who say something that people think is wrong, right? Whether it's the earth is round instead of the earth is flat, or that, hey, maybe women should have the right to vote. All of these things start off as minority views, as unpopular views, and in many cases, as unlawful views or activities or actions. And it is only by protecting these people, the unusual people, that we allow them a free space to communicate, a safe space where they can argue these things with their friends, right? People that they trust, people who won't judge them, to try out these ideas. And maybe they convince this friend, and then that friend goes on to convince another person, and suddenly we get a movement that improves the lives of all of us, but it had to start somewhere. If we say there can be no more privacy because it makes life easier for government investigators, right? We're saying there should be no locks on any door. We should say the police should be able to enter any house and search through it, not because you're doing anything wrong or they think you're up to no good, but simply because they want to see. Maybe you're doing something wrong, and hey, if you're not, don't worry about it. The thing is, by changing the dynamic from a policeman physically knocking on your door or leaving a note on your pillow saying we've been in your home, they do this secretly, invisibly, with the sort of private journals that record our entire lives. This could be your phone. This could be your computer. This could be your Gmail account. This could be your wall on Facebook. And when it happens, not just to one person, but to all of us everywhere, what's happening is we are creating a less free world, a less safe world. Now, on the specifics of that, what can you do to make things safer for yourself? There's a lot, but I would refer you to actually searching on the internet. You could look for my name and privacy tips. I've done interviews about this, of just a list of basic cybersecurity tasks you can do to make yourself a lot safer than you typically would be. And all of these things are free, right? They don't cost money. But remember, it's not enough simply to protect your phone, to protect your computer, even if you are the world's expert. We have to protect society, or things will only get worse with time.
Thank you so much.
Let me grab one from Twitter, Ed.
Okay.
This is a question I actually ask myself all the time. Are you the person now you imagined yourself as a child? ¿Eres la persona que te imaginaste en tu infancia?
Absolutely not. Again, I always thought working for the government would be kind of cool. You know, when I spent my very first day working at the CIA, when I went overseas undercover for the very first time, that was something that excited me. That was something that I was proud of. But as I went on and added day after day to my life, I realized it wasn't just about a job. It was about me. My view had been very narrow. I was focused on what would be good for me. Sorry, we've had someone join the call, apparently.
It's Sector. Can you please mute? Technology.
Maybe we could have the
Héctor, ¿le puedes poner en
moderator.
mute? Gracias. Sorry, man.
Thank you. No worries. Yeah, but anyway, the simple idea here is I was focused on me, as I think all young people are, right? We want to find our place in the world. And we think about that in terms of ourselves. But as I saw more and more of the world, as I moved to country after country, as I studied language after language, as I met more and more people, it changed me. And I started thinking less about me and more about us.
Edward, at the beginning of your talk, you were mentioning that it took you a long time to realize how the government was surveilling people around the world, and I would like to ask you for an advice for journalists and aspiring journalists and just concerned citizens on what to do to shorten that period of time, to realize that the world is watching us, or some part of the world is watching us, and what can we do beyond technology, you know, just person to person, to make that different, you know?
The very first principle, I think, and what was my central failing for the longest time, was never to trust power. Doubt power. That should be the first rule, the first obligation for any citizen of any country, anyone under any government, from the most oppressive to the most liberated and wonderful and utopian. Because power never deserves trust. Power is a dangerous thing, inherently and always. And it is by doubting it that we force it to prove itself. Government only becomes truly dangerous when it doesn't feel any obligation to operate in accordance with the public sort of trust, right? When they think they enjoy public support. They sort of throw elbows and they change things. And this can be good in some ways, right? But it's much better if they change things, bearing in mind at all times that the public must be persuaded to trust them. And this is ultimately about accountability. We often hear from government officials, one of the criticisms, for example, put forth to me, is that we have to have accountability of the public, right, to the laws. Maybe there's a protest that the government doesn't like, and they go, yes, well, while they have a point, while conditions are poor, while things should be better for them, they broke the law. They threw a stone. And the government in many cases is right? Because these are products of public anger. These are products of desperation. And yet, when we see these protesters brought into court, they're treated very harshly. The judge rules very solemnly. The law has been broken and the law is absolute. So these people must go to jail for a very long time to set an example, to show that the law must be respected, to show that if we allow the protester to be human, to make a mistake, and to let that pass by, other protesters will get ideas. And the next protest will be more violent. It'll be more chaotic. And eventually these will have very serious harms to the public. And you know, that sounds very persuasive. But what happens when public officials break the law? What happens when public officials are corrupt, right? When they enter the courtroom, are they treated with the same harshness? Or, as we see in the United States, when the most senior intelligence official in the United States, you can think of him as sort of the general over all of the intelligence services, went into our Congress, our parliament, and he swore an oath to tell only the truth. Now, this is a legally binding oath in the United States, and to tell a lie under these circumstances is a felony. You go to prison for 5 years if you lie. He lied. On camera, directly, no one questions the fact that he lied. Despite this, he didn't spend a single day in jail. He didn't even lose his job. And this is not just one isolated case. We see this happen again and again and again. In the United States, and I can't speak for Mexico, but I suspect many in the room have their own ideas, the more powerful the official, the more powerful the individual, the more connections they have, the more money they have, the more influence they have, the more privilege they have, the less accountability they have to the law. I would argue this is what we have to change, and this is what doubt is so powerful in instituting, is we have to make sure that those with the most privilege, the most power in our society are the ones who are held to the highest standard of behavior. to the highest level of accountability, not the most ordinary, not the least powerful of us. If we don't have that, we lose everything.
I think we have a hacker on the floor. Who is 664?
I think we've just got the URL at the top that's being shown in the room, probably.
Well, another question from Twitter. This is something I also ask myself from time to time. If you had Donald Trump face to face, what would you tell him? We've all thought about this.
I'm not sure words can work. And that's perhaps the greatest tragedy in all of this. When we look at what's happening, when we look at this man, to me, I see nothing so much as a man who has never known a love that he did not have to pay for. He understands the world in transactions. He understands the world in trades, in exchanges. But that's not what leadership is about. That's not what the United States are about. And that's not what our future should be about. I'm not sure my words can change it. I'm not sure. I would presume to try. It's not my place. But I think we, as a public, both domestically in the United States and as the larger global public, including the people in the room here tonight, we need to think very much about the message we send, not as individuals, but as a community, across borders, across beliefs, across faiths, across identities, to really speak to the international system of values that we all hold dear, that say, look, trade is an important thing. It's very much a backbone of our international system in many ways. But there are some things that cannot and should not ever be up for negotiation.
You think we should have a wall?
I think we've seen what a world with walls looks like. I don't think that's a better world.
Hi, Ed. I'm a huge fan. When I saw your movie, I was freaking out. But I have a good question. You need to be really honest with us. Do you regret for being part of any software you develop for spying people?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my big regrets is that I did not come forward sooner. It took a very long time, again, for me to develop this kind of skepticism. And the problem with these kind of secret systems, right? Whether we're talking about surveillance, whether we're talking about corruption in your office, somebody who's accepting bribes, whether we talk about sort of injustice in the government, in our neighborhoods, anything like that, is the longer you allow it to continue, the more people become convinced it's normal. And when this happens in the context of government, the more they get used to this, the more they become accustomed to believing it's necessary. The sooner and more aggressively we confront injustice, the easier it is to stop, the easier it is to change. My role in continuing these systems, supporting these systems, and eventually using these systems to target people, even when it was for good purposes, right? Even when it was for legitimate defensive roles, perpetuated a system where the public had no voice, and that's something I'm not proud of.
Another question from Twitter that I also asked myself, at what moment in your life have you been the happiest? Probably the toughest question.
Sorry?
It's probably the toughest question we've had so far.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. I don't think I can pick one. I can say that I'm, incredibly blessed. The thing that has probably been the greatest surprise, and which I am most thankful for, is that woman that I told you before, Lindsay Mills, sort of my long love. We've been together for more than 10 years now, who was with me in Hawaii, who did not know what was coming. I think it's fair to say that she had every reason to be angry with me, every reason to leave me, every reason, in fact, to hate me, because it disrupted her life in a very unfair way. But instead, she's still with me tonight, right here. And I love her very much, and I can never thank her enough for staying with me.
Hi, Ed. My question is, do you have any proof, or at least any belief that private corporations are using the same tactics of espionage strictly for marketing purposes?
I don't think I have any special proof here, right? But these things are actually a matter of public record. When we look at, for example, the activities of Facebook, every time you click a link on Facebook, they save a copy of the fact that you clicked that link. Every time you like something, every time you reply on someone, how long you spend on pages, all of these things are recorded for far longer than is absolutely necessary for their business purposes. Then, once you're logged into Facebook, and you leave Facebook, and you go to other sites around the internet, but it has that Facebook like button on it, they record the fact that you were on that site. And that's just one of these companies, right? They say they use these technologies to provide you with a better level of services, right? Which in their case means more targeted advertisements. Instead of showing you an ad for cars when you're not looking at buying cars, they'll show you ads for shoes when you are interested in buying shoes. But the real question here is, did you ever ask for that? Do you actually want that? And is it okay for Facebook to have all of this information about you, and for you to have no power, no ability to say, well, thank you very much, Facebook, for everything we've done before, but I'd like to erase that history. I'd like to delete that now and start fresh. The problem with these technologies, and again, it's not just Facebook, it's Google and many others, is that it creates a world where all of your activities are memorialized. They're saved, right, for increasing periods of time, and eventually that becomes something close to forever. And we live lives in which we can never make a mistake without that being known. We can never read a book without there being a record of it. We can never read an article. We can never show support for a political idea or a party. We can never be that person who's a little bit different without it being watched, without it being seen, without it being saved, and without it being recorded. That may be a great thing for advertisers, right? But the question is, in our interconnected world, in our future, who do we want to be in charge? Do we want it to be advertisers, or do we want it to be the public?
Thank you.
Hi, Snow. There are two very short questions.
Can we do one?
Okay. Just one question?
Yes, we have.
Okay, just one question. If the United States gives you a presidential pardon, will you continue revealing sensible information for all the world?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing to remember here is that I don't actually have any top secret information anymore. I provided all of this information to journalists, and I didn't keep it for myself for a number of reasons. The primary one being, of course, I don't want to be the one doing this. I don't think it's right for me to just say what should and shouldn't be known. I think this is the role of the free press in a society. government would argue they're the ones who decide what should and shouldn't be secret. But obviously, if we look at this for even a minute, that seems problematic. If we only knew what the government wanted us to know, we wouldn't know very much. Journalists, newspapers, the press, reporters in general, not just as a, shall we say, commercial interest of their sector, right, of their occupation, but their role in a democracy is specifically to make these decisions, is to contest the government's monopoly on information, is to argue with the government about what people truly need to know when the government disagrees. Now, citizens do have a role in this, and I wouldn't say it's wrong for people to reveal information themselves. But for me, for myself, because I know I have very strong political ideas, and I know that because this is very secret information, it's possible there could be something sensitive in here that's actually dangerous. It's better if I take that power from myself and trust journalists to make those decisions instead. However, the central idea behind the question here is, if the United States government said, all is forgiven, come back, would I do that? Yes, I would. And would I continue to criticize unjust, unfair, and abusive policies, whether they're surveillance or anything else? I absolutely would.
Okay, thank you. Mexico supports you, Snow. Thank you.
Hi, Edward. You have told us that
Thank
there's
you.
certain programs like spyware and malware that only can be buy and sell to governments. But my question is, how easily and how the probability that is that certain extremist groups like ISIS or Al Qaeda can buy these programs, or especially here in Mexico, cartels, and have more power and control?
You know, this is a really interesting question, and a very important one, because we've seen just recently, excuse me, I'm going to see if I have a visual as proof here. I do. Just recently, in the last few months, we had the NSA's very advanced, sophisticated hacking tools stolen and released online. This wasn't related to me. This was just because they have such poor security that all of their stuff is apparently being passed around now. They're so interested in offense, in being able to attack people, that they don't invest enough in defense, being able to not only protect their secrets, but protect networks, protect computers around the world. And so these tools were then used worldwide in a way that actually took hospitals down around the world. These could be taken and used by terrorist groups. Literally anyone in this room right now can download these NSA attack tools and use them to attack someone if they have a little bit of technical knowledge. This is something that will continue to get worse as time goes on, because we get back to that same dynamic. Hacking tools are not like missiles that are destroyed when they're sent. Every time, it's more like a biological weapon. When you infect someone with it, they could very easily take a sample of their blood and then infect someone else with it. They're making, every time a hacking tool is used, even if it's used legitimately against a target we would all agree should be hacked, like a terrorist mastermind or some serious narco criminal or something like that who's killing people, there's a chance that they can catch this weapon and then throw it back at the public, throw it back at hospitals. This is a reason we need to be very serious across all governments, not just the United States, about prioritizing defense. Computer security is much more important for the public at large, defending our hospitals, than it is to break into the computers of terrorists. Because while we do want to be able to do this, and it is important that we preserve some capability to do this, the circumstances where that is the only way of listening to a terrorist are actually very rare. Human intelligence gathering is much more commonly used. We have traditional means of law enforcement investigation, going into someone's house, leaving a bug, flying drones in the air over them to watch them physically, using satellites that are out in space to monitor people. All of these capabilities have existed before. They will continue to exist, and they will be effective even when computer hacking is not effective. But computer hacking has costs that these other methods do not have, that endanger the public in new and very serious ways.
Thank you.
Hello, Edward. It's an absolute honor to hear you speak live today whilst I'm visiting from New York via London. So earlier you spoke about the depreciation of power in democracy and the appreciation of power in the smaller few, meaning the government. Have you thought about, or what are your thoughts about, I guess, tax withholding as a new form of democracy, bringing the power back to the people?
This is an interesting idea, very radical idea. You're probably on a list now, but we all are. The question is, now that we're all on the list, where are we on the ranking, right? I think you just moved up a few rungs. But that's a good thing. We shouldn't be afraid of the government. We shouldn't be afraid to have these ideas. Whether it's effective, right, the idea of tax resistance is beyond my expertise. But there is a very real principle here in that in a democracy, the government derives its legitimacy from a single concept, the consent of the governed, that the public supports what's happening. As the secrecy and abuse of secrecy in government continues to escalate, to become more common, that consent, it can be argued, is reduced. The question becomes, when does the legitimacy of these governments begin to be reduced at a point where more direct forms of resistance are not just morally justified, but truly necessary? I think for every individual, that bar is different. And I would argue that you should be very careful in evaluating these ideas. Because we know the government in every country comes down very strictly on tax resistance because they recognize it as a very unique threat to their power. A government without the authority and the capability to enforce taxation is a government which has begun to decline. But there may be a point in history, and perhaps it is fast approaching, where this kind of thinking becomes not just interesting, but urgent.
So we have time for 2 more questions. Make them count. Yep.
Hi, Edward. I'm such a huge fan, and I've read a lot of all your opinions, but the opinion I am interested in more, it's actually today, how are you? I mean, it's like a lot of pressure to being you, how you take it. I mean, how's to be you and deal with it and deal with the decision you made for the whole of your life, for the end of your life, and how you're dealing with it.
You know, I'm doing much better than expected. I never thought I would have kind of a happy ending. And I am still living in exile, right? And that is always going to be difficult. But I'm happy. And I'm still happy because I can wake up every morning proud of the work that I did the day before. I can look forward to the work that I'm going to do in this day and the next day. I can talk to new people, people like you. I have to say with regret that I've never had the chance to get down to Mexico and Latin America. I certainly tried. The NSA wasn't too excited about that one. But with each passing year, All of the government's claims that this reporting was going to cost lives, that the oceans were going to boil off, that the sky was going to catch fire, don't come to pass. And people see that no real harm came as a result of the public knowing that the government was spying on all of us. And at the same time, they see very clear public benefit from this happening. They see new abuses where governments should never have had these powers in the first place because they abused them. And it feels a little bit more like a vindication, a little bit more like we've come to a common understanding that while people may not necessarily agree with everything that I did or how I went about it, this was a conversation that we as the public had to have. This was something that we, the public, needed to know. And, maybe this sounds a little bit crazy, but it gives me hope that before I die, maybe I'll get a chance to see Mexico in person.
Thank you, Edward.
Last question before we let you go. Última pregunta.
Hi, Edward. First of all, thank you because I'm getting my degree because of the information you give about prison program. So thank you.
Wow. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And well, the question is, I know you're aware about all the security matters in our country. So in a country such as this, what would it be your advices for someone who wants to work in this intelligence agency, but for the sake of this nation?
This is a difficult one, but it's a very important question, so thank you for asking. One of the questions that I get a lot at these kind of talks from young people is, should I not work for the intelligence services? Or should I not work for these companies because they've done the wrong thing? And there are two general ways of looking at this. One is you should go into these organizations to try to change them, to be a positive force on the inside that reforms them. On the negative side, there is the argument that by providing talent to these organizations that do bad things, you're making them capable of abuses and injustice that they would not be able to do otherwise. And without you, without people like you, they may never be able to reach this point, and you could possibly starve them out of being. But there's the practical approach where if you don't get hired, someone else will. And maybe this person won't have a moral perspective. Maybe they won't care if their powers are abused. They only care about getting a paycheck. But the primary thing I would say here is, no matter what you decide, which of these paths, which of these kinds of thinking persuades you, if you do go work for the government, remember one thing. There have been many, many, many people before you who thought the same thing, who thought they could go into the government to be a positive force, to reform the government and to make it sort of a perfect institution of truth, justice, and humanity, right? This is what we all want. And of course, nobody thinks they're going to save the world in one day. But abuses still occur. There has been no government throughout the history of humanity that has been that perfect shining city, that has been that icon of justice that we strive for. And why is that? It's because we're small. It's because we can be persuaded by institutions, by all of the people around us, much more easily than we can persuade institutions. So it is very possible, and it is the likeliest outcome, that you will be persuaded into the direction of corruption, right? But let's say a soft corruption, not that you're going to become evil, not that you're going to think that you're doing the wrong thing, but simply that you're thinking this is normal, that sacrifices have to be made, that we have to do difficult things, maybe even bad things, for good reasons. But this is really where it all starts to go wrong. What we have to do is be morally inflexible. We have to know our values, to recognize what wrong is, to say what that line is, what we won't do before we join these institutions. And we have to stay true to them, because we'll walk past that line inch by inch, step by step. And it's only 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, where we look back on it and go, was that right? These things, again, are different for everyone. I wouldn't say, never go into government. I say we need good people in government. We need better people in government. We need people to run for office and get these crooks and thieves and liars out of them. But more than anything else, the first thing, the ultimate rule that we all have to abide by is to care. Don't become tired. Don't become worn. Don't become exhausted. It happens to all of us. And the way we fight it is by creating ties with those around us. Persuade them. Create not just friends, create allies, create comrades, create a movement by being a leader, right? And being a leader doesn't mean you have to be a special person. It just means you have to be the first to say something. You have to start. It's not enough to believe in something. It's not enough to believe the government can be better. It's not enough to believe that things can change. You have to stand for those ideas. You have to risk something for those ideas. And ultimately, you have to act to change things and make that better world not an idea, but something real.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Con esto damos por concluido. Thank you, Edward.
Muchas gracias.
Con
Edward.
esto.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Good night. Pues con esto damos por acabado TagCDMX. Muchísimas gracias, Rafa. Muchísimas gracias a Fusión, que presentó esta conferencia, a la Ciudad de México por los 5 años de compartir con nosotros este festival, a la Sedeco, al Catel, a BSmart, a los ricos tés de Twinnings y a todos ustedes que fueron parte de esta 5ª edición de TagCDMX. Nos vemos el próximo año. Gracias.
Y también Rafa, que ahorita lo presento, nos va a platicar un poco más de ellos. Pero antes quiero también agradecer al Centro Cultural del Bosque y al Teatro de la Danza por abrirnos sus espacios para este festival, por recibirnos estos días. Desde el año pasado nos abrieron sus puertas y la verdad es que es un espacio increíble para organizar este festival. Y también quiero agradecer a la Ciudad de México, por supuesto, que creyó en nosotros y en este festival desde el primer año y nos ha apoyado en todo. También creo que está increíble que en esta ciudad estén sucediendo todos estos festivales, todas estas fiestas, galerías, no sé, una explosión de creatividad. La verdad es que lo aplaudimos. Y bueno, ahora sí ya no voy a hablar más, voy a presentar a Rafa Fernández de Castro. Pasa, Rafa.
Gracias, Tania.
Rafa, bueno, lo conozco hace poquito tiempo, estamos justo trabajando en este nuevo proyecto que se llama Fusión. Él lleva trabajando 3 años en Fusion en Estados Unidos y ahora vino para aquí a México para presentar este nuevo medio. Entonces lo dejo para que nos platique un poco de Fusión y también pues para que lleve esta conversación con Edward Snowden.
Gracias, Tania.
Gracias, que lo disfruten. Lo dejo.
Bueno, no les quiero echar un rollo larguísimo porque sé que vinieron a ver a Ed Snowden, pero Fusión va a ser, yo lo definiría como un punto de encuentro para los lectores curiosos, inquietos, que buscan historias sobre las tendencias que los rodean, contadas sin pretensiones. Vamos a abordar temas tan diversos como el arte, la sátira política, la innovación, el medio ambiente, y siempre subrayando para el lector cómo me afecta esto a mí. Sobre todo, vamos a hacer un megáfono para todas las voces de México, sobre todo las voces que no están representadas en la cobertura del día a día de los medios tradicionales.
Sin embargo, no pide disculpas.
I would not have done it if I didn't believe it was right.
Recientemente, tuiteó en español para advertirnos sobre los peligros del ciberespionaje después de que un reportaje del diario The New York Times señalara que se intentó monitorear los dispositivos electrónicos de periodistas y activistas mexicanos. Su mensaje es bastante simple. Algunas de las tecnologías que fueron creadas para liberarnos están siendo usadas para chantajearnos y controlarnos. Nuestras computadoras, celulares, redes sociales. El gran hermano ya está aquí. Traidor, patriota, soplón, disidente, héroe. Edward Snowden.
Tenemos a Ed en la línea. Ed. Bienvenido a México. Welcome to Mexico City.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear us all right? Can you hear us all right?
I can. You hear me?
Perfect. Ed, my first question has to be, are we being spied on right now?
Absolutely. We're using Google Hangouts. So in addition to the governmental mass surveillance that we all hear about, companies and corporations are very much doing the same thing. Where this is most dangerous is where we see a fusion between the two, working hand in hand. Google Hangouts, which we're using right now because this is a public call, makes a record of every communication.
So hit me one more. Gotta keep on being on the run, 'cause I wanna live without a line between the moon and sun. Release me, kill my misery, and redirect my destiny. We're headed for a better day.
Muchísimas gracias por estar en esta última conferencia de TagCDMX. Estamos de muy buen humor por lo que viene en los próximos minutos. Me piden, les recuerde que el uso de celulares no se puede en esta conferencia, no se vale grabar nada. Y bueno, pues estamos muy contentos, pues TagCDMX cumple 5 años de celebrar ideas geniales, y para platicarles mejor de lo que quiere decir esto, está aquí Tania Esparza Oteo, quien es la directora general de nuestro festival. Un aplauso, por favor.
Ay, como que mucha luz. Bueno, hola a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí todo el festival, por estar aquí también en esta conversación. Pues estamos muy contentos, como dijo Emiliano, nuestra voz en off. Esta es nuestra quinta edición y ha sido pues un viaje increíble estar organizando este festival de creatividad. Hemos aprendido muchísimo, hemos conocido gente increíble. Siento que hemos puesto esta plataforma como para que talentos de muchas disciplinas se conozcan y hagan cosas juntos. Y bueno, pues para cerrar, tenemos esta conversación con Edward Snowden, una gran personalidad. Ahorita vamos a ver un video que vamos a presentar.
Cuando digo eso me refiero a la comunidad LGBT, a la comunidad indígena, a las subculturas urbanas y a los grupos de baja inclusión social. Queremos ser muy inclusivos y queremos que ustedes participen en este proyecto. si ustedes siempre han querido escribir para el Reforma, pero no tienen un contacto en la industria, si ustedes quieren escribir para el Universal o salir en la tele, vénganse con nosotros. Estamos buscando gente hambrienta, gente con talento, pero sobre todo con muchas ganas de hacer las cosas, con muchas ganas de hacer periodismo. Y en verdad este es un esfuerzo de periodismo de chavos para chavos. Hasta ahí mi rollo. Cuando esté Fusión se van a enterar, va a estar muy padre. Preparamos un video para todos aquellos que no creo que sean muchos que no sepan quién es Ed Snowden. Y durante el transcurso de la entrevista, por favor, piensen en preguntas. Vamos a abrir el micrófono por 30 minutos. Van a poder hablar directamente con Ed Snowden. Y para los que están desde fuera viéndolo por el live stream, pueden mandar sus preguntas al Twitter de Tag. Vamos a seleccionar algunas y las vamos a leer para que esto sea totalmente plural, totalmente democrático. Entonces, muchas gracias y rolen video y nos vamos a la entrevista.
Era un chico callado que llevaba una vida relativamente tranquila con su novia en Hawái, hasta el día en que a los 29 años, Edward Snowden se convirtió en el fugitivo más buscado del mundo. Snowden, un contratista de la Agencia de Seguridad Nacional de Estados Unidos, filtró cientos de miles de documentos de inteligencia que revelaron que el gobierno estadounidense estaba espiando a sus propios ciudadanos a través de programas secretos de vigilancia masiva. El genio de la computación huyó a Hong Kong y colaboró con un grupo de periodistas para publicar los documentos secretos. Las agencias más poderosas del mundo se le fueron encima. Snowden tenía la intención de tomar otro vuelo e huir a América Latina, pero su pasaporte fue cancelado y al final pidió asilo en la Rusia de Vladimir Putin. Su caso dividió a una nación.
I think he's a total traitor, and I would deal with him harshly.
He is a lawbreaker. He violated American law.
I think Snowden played a very important role in educating the American people to the degree in which our civil liberties, constitutional rights are being undermined.
I believe he's a hero. I believe he's coming directly from his heart, that he feels some goodness, that he wants to be truthful to the American people.
Quizá el gran crimen de Snowden fue confirmar y detallar lo que ya sospechábamos. Desnudó las operaciones del gobierno estadounidense. Entre otras cosas, reveló que el gobierno tuvo acceso a los récords telefónicos de millones de clientes de la compañía Verizon y los datos de usuarios de Google, Facebook y Apple. Los programas gubernamentales recopilaron grandes cantidades de datos sobre ciudadanos de Estados Unidos y otros países, entre ellos México. Se intervinieron las comunicaciones de líderes, entre ellos el presidente Felipe Calderón y Enrique Peña Nieto cuando aún era candidato. La agencia espió a ciudadanos, empresarios, políticos y diplomáticos en otros países para que los funcionarios estadounidenses tuvieran una ventaja competitiva a la hora de negociar. Snowden ahora ha sido inmortalizado en libros, películas, documentales y símbolos de protesta. Pero si regresa a Estados Unidos, podría ser encarcelado hasta por 30 años. O algo peor.